Synchronicity is Carl Jung's term for circumstances that appear to be meaningfully related but lack causality. Personally, I tend to believe that everything happens, including very strange coincidences, for a very specific reason. This applies to our thoughts and their impact on the world. However, synchronicity is a good word to describe my next experience. But first I will say that this video may contain spoilers for A Nightmare on Elm Street and It movies. I also realize that some of my wife's connections to those two films may be too far-fetched, but I will include them in the video just in case. After all, the topic of synchronicities is still little studied. What if my experience is still not a mere coincidence after all? I watched The Nightmare on Elm Street movies when I was a kid, and didn't remember much of that movie until I rewatched the entire series a few weeks ago. As for It, as a kid I started watching the TV version from 1990, but I stopped watching it at the moment with the photo of the winking boy. I've had enough of what I've seen. In the end, I decided to watch all the It movies a few weeks ago, and they were no longer scary, except for a couple of moments where, due to a surprise, a slight hit of goosebumps still made itself felt. In my video about my experience with visions and hallucinations, I talked about how I saw the It monster several times in front of my closed eyes. All those visions were caused by a feeling of fear that I had shortly before those visions. Realizing this and gathering my thoughts, the visions left and did not appear. This understanding is of interest, because in both movies, fear plays a very important role in whether the main characters survive or not. This is reminiscent of my experience with It, when I myself was the source of that vision, which went away and returned only when I again allowed myself to feel a slight fear. Watching the Freddy Krueger movies, I wondered if Stephen King watched it and it somehow influenced his It character in the book of the same name, which he published a few years after the first Krueger movie was released. Then I found out that King actually started writing his book back in 1981. Numbers often appear in my experience. I consider such synchronicities and coincidences because I have experience with numerology. This may be a separate topic, but in short, I often see the number 33 and its variations. To be specific, I had a case where a disembodied voice said to my right ear, "Look," and I saw 33 on the screen. Then several times I felt the desire to turn my head and look at some part of the computer screen. And when I did this, there was the number 33. On Thiaoouba they have 333 days in a year. And if you count the seconds in their year, we get 33,333,000 and 300 Casio. A Casio is almost equal to our second. There are other cases with 33, but the topic of this video is about something else. I just want to show that the numbers that I met in those two films may well have some meaning. I'll start with movies about It. My visions of It are the most significant connection to that film, but there are others that we'll talk about now. As with A Nightmare on Elm Street, I am well aware that much of what I say next may well be too much of a stretch, but just in case this is not the case, I will mention all possible synchronicities. I used to have the pseudonym Steve because of Stephen King. Now I no longer need to hide behind an assumed name as a consequence of my spiritual growth. Then, in early childhood, maybe when I was about 4 years old, I wanted to learn how to write, and I wrote poetry for a while. And at about 20 years of age, I wanted to write screenplays, and now I'm thinking about writing a fiction book. I officially translated the book Thiaoouba the Golden Planet into Russian, and then I wrote my book Simple Truths of Life. Speaking of the planned fiction book, I named the file 27. I can't tell you the exact reason why 27, so as not to spoil the plot of the planned book, but if you are familiar with the content of my free book Simple Truths of Life, then you may well understand the meaning of that number. In the 2017 It movie, it is said that It goes out hunting roughly every 27 years. The first movie starts in 1988, and the second starts in 2015. And in the movie from 1990, this period is 30 years. The first part takes place in 1960, and the second in 1990. Regarding King's book, the events there take place in 1957, 1958, and then in 1984 to 1985. Because until recently I had never watched the full movie, when I had my first hallucination with it and realized that my fear was generating it, I could not even imagine that it was fear that plays a major role in the It story. When I first heard this from a review of the film on YouTube, after my vision, I began to realize that this whole experience could be something more than just a coincidence. When I decided to watch all the It movies, they were almost not scary for me. I saw it as a result of all the knowledge that I did not have as a child, but acquired in the course of my life. Knowledge is power, as they say. No wonder they say that people are often afraid because of ignorance. I'll mention that it was the 22nd book published by Stephen King. It was his 18th novella, and 13th story written under his own name. As it turned out, the events of the 2017 It movie take place in 1988, the year in which I was born. In the movie, this meant that the monster It returned to hunt in 1988. I never knew this until I first saw that movie on October 22nd, 2022. Just like I didn't know that the film starts in October. I watched the last film released in 2019 on October 23rd, as I didn't have time to do it on the 22nd. The movie takes place in 2016. That year I turned 28, and that year had a huge meaning for me. Exactly 14 years ago, when I was 14 years old, I made a terrible decision to start actually fantasizing, living in fantasies, so as not to have pain from the reality in which I found myself, in which, having the knowledge that I had then, could not handle. But in my 28 years, I began to try to completely rebuild my life. For the first time, I was able to overcome my fear and went to meet a girl. She was already married, but the fact that I finally did what I should have done half of my life ago, at 14, gave me a huge boost to keep looking for a girlfriend. It was not easy at times. The fear of speaking did not go away immediately, but in the end, on my best days, I could calmly approach girls who were among a crowd of people. My fears gradually left, being replaced by knowledge. It is that experience that plays a huge role in the fact that I'm able to make all my videos now, honestly talking about myself and my life experience. Therefore, given my visions of it and other synchronicities associated with it, I could not help but pay attention to this date. We can also see that fear again plays a very important role here. In my case, I conquered fears, and in the end I realized that the movie that I stopped watching as a child is not scary if you have certain knowledge. And no offense to King, but if you know the plot of the book, then the origin of the monster It is very, very funny and childish. I'm talking about the turtle here, of course. But let's go back to the 2019 film. At the 17th minute, a scene is shown in which Stan puts together a puzzle picture. This alone would not be something remarkable if, on that night, on October 23rd, 2022, I did not have a dream in which I for the first time heard the mention of a puzzle picture in a dream. And then fragments of that picture were shown. I don't remember the details of the dream. Another significant thing is that after a few minutes, Stan commits suicide. This is related to me because in my life, I seriously thought about suicide 3 times. I was looking for a way to run away from problems in life that I thought I could not overcome. But in the end, I still managed to face them and overcame many of my problems. This way of searching and finding the knowledge and life understandings necessary for a happy life without depression can be compared with the search for puzzle pieces. They exist. We just need to find them and arrange them correctly in order to get a complete picture. In our case, the metaphorical picture is the understanding of the work of the world in which we live, There are other similarities with characters from The Losers Club. Bill stutters, and I stuttered from age 5 to 18, when I learned about the true cause of stuttering.
Plus, Bill became a writer. As I said, I did a translation of a book, and then I wrote my own. Further, when I was watching the 1990s movie It, young Beverly's face reminded me of Christina's when I saw her for the second time. Christina is the girl I met at the Ostankino Tower in the summer of 2020. Of all the girls who agreed to talk to me, she had the most significant influence on me. Sometimes I think of her. I wrote about that event in detail in my book.
Richie and Eddie were never written as gay by King, but some readers have interpreted them as such, and so have the filmmakers. As a child, due to lack of certain important knowledge, I had a small sexual experience with a guy about my age. At the same time, I am of normal sexual orientation, and I have always liked girls. I can also find similarities with other characters, but they are very minor. Plus, their stories differ from one another in the two films and in the book. I won't mention them. As for the It monster itself, a long time ago, long before my first vision with it, I had a dream in which there were similar monsters with big heads and protruding pointy teeth. But their skin color was dark. In the dream, everything was very normal, until all the monsters looked at me at the same time in response to one of my thoughts. They were telepaths and knew everything I was thinking. There is an idea at the end of the movie that the losers have nothing to lose. That thought reflects what I wrote in my book. A person cannot lose what he doesn't have. This is one of the reasons why I was able to write the truth about myself and my life, and then publish it for the worldwide access. After all, at that time I had nothing that I could lose from such a publication. Let's move on to A Nightmare on Elm Street movie. One of the interesting synchronicities is the number of the house where Nancy and some other heroes of the subsequent series live. This is number 1428. You already know about the great significance of these numbers in my life. At the age of 14, I made a wrong decision that had a very negative impact on my life. And only 14 years later, when I was 28 years old, did I begin to get out of that terrible state. I wrote about those events in detail in my book, Simple Truths of Life. By themselves, these numbers might not have been so significant, if it wasn't for the fact that I had hallucinations with It monster. And by that time, I had already noticed many similarities with that fictional character. And the Freddy film itself is very similar to it, as I said earlier. Then they say that Freddy killed about 20 children. You can watch my video about Thiaoouba numbers to find out the significance of that number, as well as the relation of the number 2 to 0. Or you can pause and read the relevant part of the script for that video. The following synchronicities already affect the real house, where the first movie was filmed. It's located at 1428 North Genius Avenue in Los Angeles, and was built in 1919. The following possible synchronicities may well be very far-fetched, but I will mention them. The Wikipedia article says that in 2006 it was put up for sale, and in 2008 it was bought. In 2013, the owners of the house changed. Then there is a mention that Heather Langenkamp and Robert Englund, who played Freddy Krueger, visited the house together in 2013, while Lisa Wilcox, who played Alice Johnson in the third installment, visited it in 2017. For me personally, those years were marked by the following events. It was the end of 2006 when I found out the true cause of stuttering, which motivated me to try to start changing my life for the better. I went to work, started learning English, and had big plans for life, but I also made mistakes. So, around May-June 2007, at the age of 18, I decided to go to a prostitute, thinking that it would help me to put thoughts of sex out of my head and concentrate on my studies and work. so that later, having achieved something, I would look for a girlfriend. That sentence is just about to burst with the sheer amount of errors rammed into it. But at the time, I did what I thought was right, with the meager knowledge that I had then. The prostitute's name was Natasha, and the numerical significance was in the number 25. That's how old one of her clients was, who had never had sex. It is important to note that I fell in love with Natasha and wanted to help her, but because of the sudden fear of speech, I could not tell her the true reasons for my second visit to her, and alas, I made the same mistake that I did when I was about 15. I deliberately put a block in my head, which, at every hint of the thought of Natasha, painted her into a girl who herself made her choice to become a prostitute. 2008 is the year when, due to my inability to remove masturbation from my life, prostitutes did not help me, which is not surprising. My health continued to deteriorate, and as a result I fell into bed and could hardly leave the house due to severe heart arrhythmia, breathing problems, and panic attacks. I was then 20 years of age, and of course it was in that year that I found the book Thiaoouba Prophecy, which not only saved my life, but also completely changed it, and taught me a lot of things. In 2013, I remembered Natasha, and at the end of the summer, in August, I was finally able to recover enough to go for the third time to the apartment where I once met her. The door was opened by the owner of the apartment, who rented that apartment to a man in 2007, and did not suspect that he had set up a brothel there. She said that in August of 2007, there was a murder there. A guard was killed. I don't know who killed him. I tried to find more information, but to no avail. I was 25 years old at the time. In 2017, I was 28 years old. The main event was that in January, and to be very precise, on Friday the 13th, I met a girl for the first time. I've already briefly mentioned that story, and how in subsequent years I was able to get rid of many fears. But I need to mention that in the course of my brief conversation with that red-haired girl, I learned that at the time she had been married for 13 years. It was another connection with the number 13 in my life. I'll note that between these dates there were no other significant events that greatly changed the course of my life. It's also funny to note that as a child I'd made myself long clothes from golden foil, from candies that I put on my fingers. I will note the dark synchronicities that seem to connect me to the two films. In several difficult moments of my life, I used to have not the best fantasies, and Freddy and it are literally killers. Plus, there is a possibility that I could have committed a similar crime in past lives, which could be one of the reasons for my suffering in this life. A long time ago, I had several dreams that hinted at this possibility. Of course, dreams can mean many things, and we still have much to learn about their nature, but the very idea may be true. I also recently decided to watch some of Wes Craven's other films. I have noticed how some of the themes in his first movie, The Last House on the Left, are reflected in some of my thoughts and fantasies. I watched the film Scream when I was still in school, around the very troubled years that I already mentioned. I remember how bitter it was to realize that the film and its main characters were in some degree relatable to me. I won't go into details. I'll be honest, when I rewatched the first A Nightmare on Elm Street movie on December 24th, 2022, I thought from time to time, what if I had stretched too far the significance of all the synchronicities associated with this film? Well, after watching the movie, the answer was obvious, and so I decided to record this video, having no doubts anymore. Earlier that day, December 24th, I wrote 2 comments on the Professor Dave Explains YouTube channel, saying that auras and the etheric field exist, and that fact can be proven. I mentioned that people can learn to see both auras and the etheric force field. I also wrote that, in part because of charlatans, such topics are met with skepticism. Before I started watching A Nightmare on Elm Street, I saw that I had 2 notifications on YouTube, and it was clear that these were the most likely replies to my 2 comments. You may know from my book that for a very long time I had difficulty speaking the truth directly, knowing that many people are skeptical about such topics. For a long time, deep down in me, I was afraid of the negativity towards me. I had fear. It's important for me to write a few details about myself so that you better understand the importance of the next event. As a child, I was quite shy, and when I was in my early 20s, I was very afraid of negative opinions towards me. So much so that I remember how I was literally shaken once when I received one such negative comment addressed to me from some person. But over time, with the acquisition of new knowledge and understanding about life, it became easier and easier for me to write the truth about myself, as well as read comments and opinions of people about me. But I still had slight difficulties in just going and simply and unemotionally reading any comments people made about me. So on that day, I was not very decisive to read the comments, not yet knowing who sent them. I was about halfway through the movie when I decided that I would just go ahead and read the replies. It turned out that Dave himself answered me, calling me various bad names. I was not offended or emotionally affected in any way by his words. On the contrary, I was very corrected and by and large calmly wrote adequate answers. Plus, I told him that I could try to prove telekinesis, and then try to prove auras and maybe even astral projection. I wrote that I was ready to consider other ideas of how to prove the existence of dormant abilities in humans. Even despite his misplaced hostility and total disbelief, I was ready to cooperate with him for the common good of all people living on this planet. Having said this, in A Nightmare on Elm Street, Nancy defeats Freddy when she takes away the energy she gave him and turns her back on him. Freddy attacks her and disappears. He no longer has an effect on Nancy. After watching the movie, I realized that the idea in that scene was consistent with my experience with Dave's negative comments, when I was completely calm, fearless, and adequate. Using the terms and ideas from the film, we can say that before I seemed to give my energy to people whose negative opinions I was afraid to receive in return. And now I seem to be able to take back the energy that I gave, and all the negative influences on me seemed to disappear. I took, or initially did not give, Dave my energy, and I came out the winner. He behaved like a child and showed his dark side, not me. I acted like a civilized adult. Given all the other synchronicities with it and A Nightmare on Elm Street, I wasn't surprised that at the very hour that I was rewatching the first Nightmare, I had such an experience with negative comments. Then this experience shows once again the recurring theme with visions of it and with ideas from both films. To put it very simply, if you allow yourself to be afraid, you suffer. If not, then you do not suffer. And fear is something that has always accompanied me. And it is something that I've been learning to overcome all my life. That hour was another significant event for me, when I made progress, when I became a better person. This experience again showed me that there is something in these synchronicities, that they are not mere coincidences. I'm recording this video edition after I discovered new synchronicities with the two films. When making a video about hallucinations, I saved footage from the 2017 It movie. Then I noticed 3 new synchronicities associated with numerology, with numbers that played or still play a significant role in my life. You already know about these numbers from my video. It's also very interesting that all these numbers are found only in the scenes which also play a big role for me. It is this fact that gives significance to these new synchronicities. Here is their list. In the 2017 It movie, the scene with it on the projector screen starts at 1 hour, 13 minutes and 13 seconds, and ends at 20 seconds. I talked about the significance of that scene in the hallucinations video, but in short, I saw an identical hallucination with the monster It, whose face was first covered with hair, and then it gradually began to appear. I used this exact movie clip for the hallucinations video, when I first noticed that the timing of that scene had a numerological relevance to me. Then I decided to check the scenes in other films and found new numerological connections, which made me understand that these numbers were not a coincidence, but yet another synchronistic connection with me. Here's what I found. In the 1990 movie It, the boy winks at 13th minute and 33rd second. It was after this scene that I stopped watching the movie It as a child, and only watched it in its entirety a few months ago. In A Nightmare on Elm Street, at 1 hour, 27th minute and 20th second, Freddy Krueger attacks Nancy, but she defeats him. As you already know, this scene is the key to understanding that synchronicities have meaning and are not some weird coincidence. There are a few more interesting things. In the first Nightmare on Elm Street at 20th minute and 28th second, Nancy's house is shown for the first time and the house number is visible, 1428. In the 1919 movie It, at 13th minute, Bill takes out a photo album and we see the caption George Elmer Denbrough, Elmer and Elm Street. I think the possible connection is clear here. Later, in the 1919 It movie, at about 1 hour, 33 minute and 33 seconds, it becomes quite clear that Stan committed suicide. I already mentioned the connection of the scene with me in this video. So, we see that all these scenes play a big role in my life, given all my synchronistic experience with these films at this point in time. And all of them, by some coincidence, take place in time periods whose numbers played and continue to play a big role in my life. I understand that there will be many skeptics among the viewers of this video, but knowing what I know and having the life experience that I have, I cannot help but see another 100% synchronicity here. And we must remember that if only one scene began at a time that has numerological connection with me, and others did not, then in that case, we would have a case of simple coincidence. But the fact that all the scenes that are important to me have numerological significance to me, along with the rest of the synchronistic experience, already makes the whole experience something big. Of course, this raises a lot of questions about how the universe works. How is it that everything that happened on the sets of those films, as well as in the editing room, had to put those scenes in those exact time frames? Why do I have these synchronicities at all? Yes, as you already know from my video, this experience proves that what we now call synchronicity has a very clear reason behind its existence. But this does not answer the question of how it works and why it works this way. And finally, Sawa and her people who live on Thiaoouba, the planet of the last 9th category, are hermaphrodites. She told Michelle that the personal pronoun it is suitable for talking about them in the third person. Given my experience with the word, I've always found it strange to think of Sawa as it, and I always think of her as she. It was the same with my higher self, but in recent years I have begun to use the pronoun it when talking about higher selves. So, given my visions of it and the abundance of synchronicities between me, it, and A Nightmare on Elm Street, I don't think this is just a coincidence. Why I have this experience, I don't know. What can be said for sure is that if you have visions and hallucinations, then you are not crazy. It's all part of nature. It all operates according to the clear laws of the universe that govern the work of our world. We have yet to fully understand those laws, and I hope that scientists will begin to seriously study the nature of hallucinations and visions. Thank you for watching, and if you have your own experience with synchronicities, then you can share it in the comments.